protect our rights against abuses by other citizens, organizations, and even the government itself.
A bill is a proposal for either a new law or for a change to an existing law.
Jamaica's parliament, that responsibility is shared between two houses.
There are 21 parliamentarians
appointed from both political parties to the upper house, also known as the Senate. And there are 63 members of parliament that we, the people, elect to the lower house, also known as the House of Representatives. To pass a law, there is a minimum of 6 stages required in each house. The process can begin in the upper house by a senator or in the lower house.
Start there.
1. The first stage begins with the introduction by the minister responsible for the bill, followed by the first reading of the bill by the clerk to the houses. This clerk is more like the CEO, the chief executive officer for the parliament. An announcement of the bill is published in the Gazette. This is a public newsletter that the government uses to inform the citizens of what the parliament is doing on your behalf. 2. The second reading begins with a summary of the bill by the minister. The main reasons for the bill are discussed both by the government and opposition members to determine if Jamaicans would really be better off with the new law or changes to an existing law. A vote is taken by the House to determine if the bill will move to the committee stage. Sometimes before going to that stage, the minister responsible for the bill can recommend the use of a joint select committee. It's called joint as its members are taken from both the upper and lower house. To benefit from greater consultation, the committee is empowered to invite the public to share their views of the bill in writing or in person, and does so through radio, TV, and newspaper adverts. This Joint Select Committee submits its recommendations to the House of Representatives. The House debates this report, and a vote is taken to determine if the bill should go on to the committee stage, where it is examined by a committee of the whole House. Yes, that's the name. And that's what it is, a committee of all the members of parliament that carefully examines each clause and makes improvements to ensure the bill will achieve its objectives. As chairman, the Speaker of the House monitors the process to make sure the rules of the House are obeyed and the process moves along smoothly. 4. The committee of the whole House examines the bill clause by clause, then sends its recommendations for changes to the House of Representatives. This is called the report stage. 5. The bill then passes to the third reading to allow a final opportunity for MPs to make changes before it is sent to senators in the upper house. 6 to 10. In the upper house, the senators go through the same steps we just described. If any changes are made, the bill has to be returned to the House of Representatives for their discussion and approval. Now, if the bill had started in the upper house, it would also have to be returned to them for approval of any changes made by the lower house. 11. Throughout the entire process, the bill is being checked by the Legislative Council. That's the Parliament's lawyer. But before the last step, a copy is sent to the Attorney General of Jamaica for final review and certification. 12. If all is well, the bill is sent to receive the royal assent from the Governor General as the representative of the Queen, Elizabeth II. The bill is now an Act of Parliament. The Act is gazetted, and the rights of Jamaicans are further preserved and protected by a new law.
here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the king, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. Oh, Lord. Before we begin the business of the day, we have a number of visitors in the gallery. I take this opportunity to welcome you to the Senate. Normally we make or try to make a 10 o'clock start, so we apologize for the delay. So welcome to the Senate. And in particular, I must also welcome Mrs. Marcia Campbell, who is a sister of former Senator Lester Campbell, and her husband, Dr. Timon Waugh. So welcome, and in due course, we will pay an appropriate tribute to our former senator. I am also going to crave your attention to make mention of the passing of an iconic Jamaican artist, Mrs. Suzanne Alexander O.D., who passed peacefully this week, born in 1929, so she had an extended career, and she was actually born in New York and came to Jamaica early in 1951 and begun a career in Jamaica as an artist. In recognition of her achievements as an artist, she received, amongst other accolades, the Marcus Garvey Award for Art in 1978. She was inducted into the Hall of Fame of the Caribbean Foundation of the Arts in 1999 and was conferred by the government of Jamaica an Order of Distinction in the rank of Officer Class in 2024. The National Gallery of Jamaica has expressed condolences to her family, in particular her son Philip and daughter Wendy. I think that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, although I'm not asking her to contribute here, but the Minister of Foreign Affairs would recognize the work of Suzanne Alexander, because quite a few pieces of her work are actually at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I believe there is a suite there that's dedicated to some of her work from her Carnival series. So she has made a significant contribution to the development of Jamaican art, and we recognize her. I would ask the clerk to pen the appropriate missive to her family and friends, and perhaps could coordinate with the National Gallery of Jamaica to get access to those persons. It would be remiss of me not to mention former Senator Professor Trevor Monroe, who is seated to my left, and ask the membership to recognize him. He was appointed to the Senate in 1997 and served until 2006. So welcome, Dr. Trevor Monroe. Members, it is always with profound sadness that I ask the Senate to pay tribute to a former senator, and it is all the more when that person is someone who has recently sat in this chamber. So it is with profound sadness that I pay tribute today and ask my colleagues to do likewise to former Senator and former Member of Parliament Leslie Campbell, who passed earlier this week. Those of us who know him know that he was ill for some time, and he did in fact maintain his sense of humor and composure to the last, and communicated with quite a few of us. He was out of the jurisdiction. But I had the privilege of working with Mr. Campbell, Lex as we call him, in the Senate and in the legal arena for many years. And I say without contradiction that we have lost a fine Jamaican in the person of Leslie Campbell. Former Senator Campbell began his parliamentary career in March 2016 when he entered the House of Representatives as a Member of Parliament for St. Catherine Northeastern, and he later entered this chamber as a senator in 2020. During his tenure as a parliamentarian, he served with distinction as Minister without Portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and later as State Minister in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Senator Campbell was, above all, a proud and active member of the Jamaica Labour Party, playing many roles, including his service as Deputy Treasurer. Leslie was the embodiment of determination, level-headedness, and true commitment. He wanted the best for Jamaica, and he played his part in advancing our nation and our people through strategic development at the local level and engagement on the international stage. His warmth combined with his calm and kind spirit left a lasting impression on those with whom he came in contact. He was a witty conversationalist and maybe as a lawyer in him, but always had evidence to back up his assertions. I extend my deepest condolences to the member of his family, his sister who is here. Would ask that you convey to the rest of his family the fact that we have paid tribute to him this morning. His friends who were blessed to know him, may his soul rest in peace. Minister Johnson Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to join in your words of remembrance, your tribute, and to add my voice to the condolences and sympathies being conveyed to his family present, and the request that you convey to the wider family our sympathies and our prayers for your comfort at this time of grief. I recall our former colleague Leslie as all that you have described him, Mr. President. He was an attorney at law, businessman, former member in that other place, and particularly, of course, as a former member of the Senate and a former Minister of State. Leslie served in many roles outside of his parliamentary and executive roles, including as Deputy Treasurer of the Jamaica Labour Party, but I also served with him on the Legal and Constitutional Committee and other committees, dispute resolution, other committees of the party over many years. Leslie was a steady, reliable, knowledgeable, and principled leader who believed in service and his country. It was these qualities that endeared him to the good people of St. Catherine Northeastern, with whom I share my own bond through my father, the Honorable Anthony Johnson OJ, who also served that constituency. Mr. President, Leslie was committed to working for the people of Jamaica, both locally and internationally, and he offered his expertise and his valuable insights to government through service in both chambers at different times. Of course, he did so in service as well as Minister without Portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and then serving in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade as Minister of State. As a parliamentarian, and particularly Leslie carried out his duties with diligence, with dignity, and a steadfast commitment to service, earning the admiration always and respect always of his colleagues. He worked well, in fact, with colleagues on both sides, and he was, again, I say, respected by all. He was also very sincerely liked. He was just a great guy, great and personable individual. Mr. President, Leslie was appointed to the Foreign Ministry after the general election in September 2020 with responsibility for diaspora affairs. And this government has always recognized the critical role that Jamaicans overseas play in our national development, and Leslie understood this fully. He embraced the emphasis we place on diaspora affairs and was therefore entrusted with the role of building and managing these critical partnerships, and he undertook this role with fervor. In particular, he worked closely with the then newly established Global Jamaica Diaspora Council and the Global Jamaica Diaspora Youth Council towards a much more strategic and more inclusive engagement across the globe. As the inaugural chair of the GJDC, he played a key role in guiding its work, recognizing that this also transited the time of COVID and required a particular level of innovation and communication for which he was very well suited. Mr. President, he ensured that his engagement was in a manner that benefited the members of the councils, the ministry, the diaspora, and indeed the government of Jamaica. Mr. President, as referenced, of course, he took office during the height of the pandemic, and he exercised a great deal of flexibility in operations, always suggesting new ideas and new ways of doing things. He was at the helm of the process to ensure that despite the pandemic, our engagement continued, and he was instrumental in overseeing the arrangements for the virtual staging of the Diaspora Sustainability Symposium in 2021 and the Jamaica 60 Diaspora Conference, which was held in 2022 in hybrid format. In addition to Leslie's oversight of the diaspora portfolio, he made significant contributions to other areas of the Foreign Ministry's work, including at the regional level through the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, as Sherpa for the UN High-Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy, and for engagement with our bilateral partners. Mr. President, I'm also honored just to share a few memories of some members of the Foreign Ministry family who worked closely with Leslie. They reflect on being struck always by his affable manner and his interest in their welfare and well-being. He was, in some ways, they reflect a silent river that ran deep, in that he was a man of few words, but when he spoke, he did so with clarity, discernment, understanding, and a remarkable emotional intelligence. Staff also shares, and this is the most widely held, that they most fondly remember him for his jokes. Whether hit or miss, and every speech was littered with humor. But whether hit or miss, they always drew laughter. And during his brief introductory speech on the first day at the ministry, which is the most remembered speech, staff members still recall that they were not only disarmed by how funny and how personable he was, but they were also left in stitches. Mr. President, Leslie's leadership style was particularly appreciated because he's remembered as having led not just with skill, but with a heart, making everyone feel seen, valued, and supported. So I want his family to know that this is how he's remembered. And they're remembering him in this way, not only at Capitol, but across the missions where he had engaged with heads of mission and diaspora communities during his time of service. His laughter was infectious, his wit effortless, and his presence a constant reminder that work could be both most meaningful and enjoyable. He gave generously of his time, his guidance, and his belief in those around him. And in doing so, he helped others to grow in ways they didn't think possible. He led with empathy, listened without judgment, and also found ways to uplift. That kind of leadership, even if not for the longest period of time, leaves a lasting impact far beyond deadlines and achievements. Mr. President, he is well remembered by staff. So on behalf of the Honorable Alanda Terrelong, Minister of State, Sheila Sealy-Monteith, Permanent Secretary and Head of the Foreign Service, the staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, especially those who worked most closely with him, in particular Ambassador Franz Hall and Mrs. Charmaine Chung Moulton, I once again extend heartfelt condolences to the family, friends, loved ones, and colleagues of former Minister of State, Leslie Campbell. We salute his achievements, his contributions, and his memory, and we extend our prayers to his family and friends for their comfort in this time of grief. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Scott Motley.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I heard of the passing of Leslie Campbell, I felt a profound sense of loss because although I was not close to him, he had distinguished himself in all the spheres that we both operate. As an attorney, a parliamentarian, and a servant of Jamaica. His life reflected dignity, discipline, and quiet strength. There are some amongst us whose contribution is not measured by volume, but by substance, not by spectacle, but by worth. And Senator Campbell was such a man. He brought to public life a calm intellect, a careful mind, and an unwavering respect for the institution he served. And sometimes our conduct in the chamber here met with great displeasure on his part. Before entering this honorable Senate, he had already given service as Member of Parliament and later Minister of State, carrying out his duties with seriousness and humility. I would say that in this chamber, he distinguished himself by a quality that has become all too rare in public discourse: restraint. He did not seek attention through crude political banter or personal attacks. He understood that disagreement need not descend into disrespect, and that public service is elevated when debate is conducted with civility and purpose. His interventions were thoughtful, measured, and diligent. He came prepared. He listened carefully, and he always brought us back to, what about the bill? We are debating a bill. He contributed meaningfully. Longfellow wrote, Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime and departing leave behind us footprints in the sand of time. These words are fitting today. Leslie Campbell leaves footprints, not merely in the legal fraternity or in the political history of Jamaica, but in the example he set for younger parliamentarians and attorneys at law. He demonstrated that one may participate fully in political life without surrendering grace, courtesy, or dignity. The legal profession has lost a respected colleague. The Senate has lost a gentleman parliamentarian. Jamaica has lost a faithful son. To his family, his friends, colleagues, and all who mourn his passing, we extend our deepest condolences. May they find comfort in a life honorably lived and in a legacy that will endure long after the debates of this chamber have faded. May his soul rest in peace, and may light perpetual shine upon him.
Senator Sinclair. Thank you very much, Senator Scott Motley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Life can be fickle. You're here today and gone tomorrow. It does not seem that long ago that Leslie Campbell shared this space with us, a member of the Senate, and in other places as a devoted party member of the Jamaica Labour Party and an attorney at law. I had the privilege, Mr. President, of sharing all those spaces with Leslie. The Senate, the party, and in the legal profession. So we pause to honor the life and legacy of Leslie Campbell, attorney at law, a man whose intellect, discipline, and quiet excellence spoke volumes. He possessed an eye for detail, a deeply studied mind, and a record of professional success that spoke for itself. Yet, despite his accomplishments, he remained humble, never boastful, never seeking acclaim, but always grounded in purpose and principle. So, President, I recall doing a trial with Leslie in the St. James Parish Court. After he made his first appearance and spoke, I said to myself, this man is quite clever. I had to lift my game a notch. I would have said to other counsel, don't be disarmed by his posture and his congeniality. Know what you're doing when Leslie is on the other side. And, you know, we had a taxation matter, Senator Scott Motley. And Leslie called me on the morning of the taxation hearing. And something in my gut said to me, don't take that call. Don't take that call. And I made the error in taking the call, Mr. President. And what I was anticipating and expecting as to be the result of the taxation, in a matter that I was successful, it went south. Because that call, Leslie didn't even appear. He just said, Sinclair, you're going to take less. But he was able to disarm you by his congeniality. As I said, the anticipated cost went south. Leslie believed in service beyond self. He gave generously of his time, nurturing young counsel, guiding them with patience, wisdom, and a genuine desire to see them succeed. His mentorship leaves a lasting imprint on the legal fraternity. His commitment to public life was equally distinguished. He served Jamaica with honor and distinction as a member of parliament, a senator, and as a minister of state in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In each role, he brought diligence, thoughtfulness, and integrity. Within the Jamaica Labour Party, he stood as a standard bearer in a constituency in St. Catherine, carrying the banner with pride and conviction. As a deputy treasurer, he contributed to the strength and organization of the party, demonstrating loyalty and steadfast service. But beyond titles and achievements, Leslie Campbell was truly a man for all seasons, jovial in spirit, cordial in every interaction, and ever present with a warm smile. He had a way of making people feel at ease, of bringing lightness even to the most serious of moments. His life reminds us that greatness is not only measured by what one achieves, but by how one carries oneself, how one treats others, and how one gives back. On his passing, Mr. President, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance who resides in Montego Bay. Well, probably to Leslie, he was more than an acquaintance, because there was never a day that I would encounter this gentleman and he would not speak highly of Leslie and how his actions towards him positively impacted his life and that of his family in many ways. But that was the nature of Leslie Campbell. He made his mark in the hearts of many people, not only within his family, but far beyond. The gentleman said he felt compelled to express his sadness at his passing. To his family and dear friends, I express sincerest condolences. Leslie Campbell has gone too soon. We must cherish the memories of the good times we shared, and may his legacy continue to inspire, and may his soul rest in peace. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Sinclair. Senator Gill.
Thank you, President. You know, today we celebrate the life of Leslie Campbell, our colleague and friend. And I recall when we have telephone conversations, Leslie's parting shot to me would always be, we must meet up and drink a Pepsi. His passing represents a profound loss, not only to the Jamaica Labour Party, but to the public life in Jamaica and all who had the privilege of knowing and working alongside him. Leslie was a true stalwart of the Jamaica Labour Party. He embodied loyalty, discipline, and service in the pursuit of its truest form. He was never driven by personal ambition or the pursuit of prominence. Instead, he understood that political service was first and foremost about duty. Duty to party, duty to country, and duty to people. And one of the things I admired about Leslie Campbell is that he was always willing to serve in whatever capacity he was called upon. And perhaps one of his greatest marks of his character was his willingness, when necessary, to step aside and gracefully make way for others. A team player who was willing to be substituted. That's quite a sacrifice that reflected the dignity of the man. He understood that leadership was not always about occupying the front row, but about strengthening the institution and ensuring the continuity for generations to come. You know, he was a true Senate player. There were many times when we tried to make quorum, and Leslie never entered the chamber from that door or that door. It was always from that door with his bounded leather bag. And he would say, "Good morning." And so you should know this. You know, there are others who have stood up for point of order. Leslie's point of order was always grounded and the president has no alternative but to accept it. Beyond his professional and political accomplishments, Leslie will be remembered for his qualities that made him deeply respected and admired for those around him. He possessed a quiet strength that reassured others even in difficult moments. He was generous with his time, his wise counsel and encouragement, and generous with other things too, I believe. His wit and humor could lighten the heaviest atmosphere, and his intellectual rigor ensured that every discussion with him was thoughtful, informed, and meaningful. You know, Leslie also carried himself with a distinctive presence. Sometimes when he spoke, his language and expression reflected an almost aristocratic refinement. The kind associated, sir, with nobility, culture, and an old-fashioned world of sophistication. And if you add to that nobility, you might want to add money. But that's another story. You know, he was humble, warm, and unwavering respect for others. He brought grace and substance in every room that he entered. And, you know, you will engage with Leslie Campbell, but Leslie won't sometimes tell you upfront, no. He would say in that kind of noble voice, not quite. And I recall we were downstairs in the lunchroom, and one of your former colleagues who is in that other place now, parading his dreadlocks. He was engaging with Leslie, and I believe Leslie wanted more out of him, and Leslie would look over his glasses and say, you know, my friend, I believe you're onto something there. Proceed. Well, your colleague ran like a river. He was a team player in the truest sense, a man who believed that collective success mattered more than individual recognition. In an era, sir, where public life can only be consumed by ego and division, Leslie Campbell remained grounded, principled, and honorable. And as we reflect on his life, we give thanks for his contribution, his friendship, and his example. His legacy will endure in the lives he would touch and the colleagues he mentored, the causes he supported, and the values he upheld with consistency and integrity. You know, Leslie had a nice farm, and I remember getting a bunch of plantains from Leslie. The fingers were as long as my arm. To his family, and his loved ones, and his friends and his colleagues, we extend our deepest condolences and prayers during this difficult time. May the kind comfort in knowing Leslie live through his life, the meaning of dignity and service. May his soul rest in peace.
Thank you, Senator Gale. Senator Golden Campbell. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Lambert Brown.
President, I think Leader Donald Scott Martin spoke well on behalf of all of us. And I know that there are a number of people on the other side who wanted to pay a tribute to Leslie. And I thought, it's your day, you should own him. In as much as we tried from this side in targeting him to get him to vote along our lines in many of the debates. He was a man of reason, and he was reasonable. He was humble, as has been said before. I served with him on one or two joint select committee, and it was a collegial relationship there. I love to tease him, as I often did outside of the Senate when I see mention in the newspaper of cases that he has won in the courts. And I said, boy, Leslie, I have to share some of that big victory that you had. And he, of course, would find a way to deflect from the need to share. Then in latter days, I realized that he was moving Senator Gale closer to the labor aspect of the law. And he was doing some case involving labor. And I was saying, well, one day you and I will meet just as Senator Sinclair and him are on different sides. And I look forward to that. But you told me in recent times that he wasn't well, and we wished the best for him. Sadly, the day has come when it is he who must go while we abide. To his family, I say you are a good man in Leslie, and we thank you for lending him to the nation, Jamaica. I'd look forward to him returning to the Senate, but maybe health and other reasons prevented him. We say, like you, Senator Sinclair, gone too soon. Age 57 is young, but never judge it by the number of years you live. Judge Leslie by the quality of the relationship he developed while alive. And if you judge it that way, we are missing a giant, a human being who respected and treated everybody with dignity. May his soul rest in peace. And we pray with you for the loss of a wonderful soul. May the angels welcome him into paradise. We will miss him, but he will remain with us because he was a gentleman. May it please you,
Thank
Mr.
you,
President.
Senator Brown. Senator Golden Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I met Leslie Campbell just about 21 years ago. And I met him, I was introduced to him by my now husband, who is his first cousin. Immediately, Mr. President, Leslie became family to me in a real way. So you will forgive me if my tribute to him and my remarks about him this morning are a lot more personal than about his national endeavors. Les was everything that you've all said he was. He was reliable. He was extremely kind. He was thoughtful. He was a kind of person who appeared at your door when trouble was afoot without you ever having to call on him. And he was very humble, something that I often jibed him about, because I would say to him, Les, you don't need all this headache of public service. You're all right. You have done well for yourself. Why are you taking on this headache? And all these people who will frustrate you and the systems that will frustrate you. And his response was always centered around what he thought his duty was, to do if he could do, to help if he could help. His commitment to national service continued really straight up to his passing, because you could call on him at any time, even during his illness, once he was able to speak to you and run an issue by him, a thought by him. We had a lot of discussions in the last year about adverse possession and the need for reform in the laws governing adverse possession. And you know, one of the things he exemplified for me was the circumstances around those who give national service. He did not need to. He did not need positions. He did not need accolades. And oftentimes when people give their lives and their time and their resources, and I happen to know he gave a lot of his resources in public service, they get back very little. There's no reward, sometimes not even thanks. But that did not deter Leslie Campbell. Leslie was focused on giving. He was focused on service, and he wasn't focused on rewards. Leslie comes from a family of 10 children, one of whom passed before him, and one brother remaining, but mostly girls. And Marcia, my cousin, is here with her husband this morning. Les was ably and well taken care of by Bev in New York, who was by his side up to the very end. Mr. President, I'm not going to speak much longer because I don't think I can manage to. Les did so much for all of us. He was the shoulders on which many of us stood. And even though I entered the family recently, I also benefited and was supported by him. And whenever you would say to him, "Boy, Les, how can I help? What can I do to support?" "Oh, darling, nothing. You just do what you need to do and do well at it," would be his answer to me. And he continued up to the difficult parts of his illnesses, being there for everyone else. I recall talking to him about a young relative that we had and explaining to him that he was having some tough times. And before I knew it, Leslie was arranging from his sickbed to get resources in place to assist that relative. He did it not just with one, he did it with probably 2 or 3 in the course of the last year, even while he was battling his own illness. He remained, Mr. President, a safe place for many of us. He was confidential, so he was almost everybody's confidant. You could go set a problem at his feet, talk through it, and he would counsel you, oftentimes infusing that with the very humor that you all have experienced from him. It was never going to be a serious and sober moment. But you knew that when you spoke to him, it landed there and it stayed there. His honor is unquestionable. I thank him for his example to me. I thank him for his example to my children. I will miss him terribly, and I thank the Senate for recognizing and honoring him, and because he has given me the privilege by his treatment of me, I will say on behalf of the Campbell family, we thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Golden Campbell. The clerk has asked me also to put on record the condolences of herself and all the members of her staff who interacted with Leslie over the many years and asked me to just convey to the family their deepest of condolences. I'm going to ask the membership to rise for a moment of silence. May his soul rest in peace and light perpetual shine on him. Just want to point out to his sister that a number of us are invested in that Bombay mango tree around the back of the house. So when the time is appropriate, don't forget us. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate are the following: annual report and audited financial statements of the SCJ Holdings Limited for the financial year 2020-2021 and its related ministry paper number 28 of 2026 titled Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements of the SCJ Holdings Limited for the year ended March 31, 2021. Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements of the Jamaica Bauxite Mining Limited for the year ended March 31, 2022, and its related ministry paper number 29 of 2026 titled Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements of the Jamaica Bauxite Mining Limited for the year ended March 31, 2022. Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements of the Jamaica Vacations Limited for the financial year 2023-2024. Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements of the Montego Bay Convention Center for the financial year 2022-2023. And finally, the annual report of the National Solid Waste Management Authority for the financial year 2024-2025. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought.
Clarification. These reports, am I correct that they are relating to legislation which said they must be presented within months after the year? Because I'm seeing one for 2021, and we're now in 2026, 27. There's legislation which requires that they be presented within, in some case, 4 months after the financial year. Just checking for clarity.
Senator Brown, it's something that you would have to inquire as to, because we just table from the entity as you receive it. But if you wish, the clerk can look into it for you.
That's fine, President. I just wanted clarification,
Okay.
especially in light of what will happen later on.
Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. I have the honor to advise the Honorable Senate that on the 5th day of May 2026, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Jamaica Dairy Development Board Act, expand the definition of milk in keeping with international standards, and provide for connected matters was passed in the House of Representatives with one amendment.
Mr. President, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bill.
A bill shortly entitled the Jamaica Dairy Development Board Amendment Act 2026 read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg for second reading of the bill. Give notice, of second reading of the bill.
Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Minister.
Mr. President, today we will resume and conclude the debate on the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Act 2026. That is the primary item on the agenda today. I just want to extend apologies and, with your leave, advise that I have to depart in order to attend a funeral, during which time Senator Morris Dixon will lead the Senate and continue to pilot the bill through the debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Next contributor, please. Senator Small Ferguson.
Mr. President, I rise to contribute to the debate on the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Bill 2026. At the outset, Mr. President, let me just state categorically that I support the stated objectives of the bill. In the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa, the need for a coordinated, decisive, timely response to support reconstruction, restore normalcy to the lives of those affected, and build a stronger, more resilient Jamaica is not in dispute. Indeed, Mr. President, the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons states that the bill seeks to establish the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority and a statutory framework for, and I quote, the efficient, coordinated, and transparent management of extraordinary, time-bound reconstruction and resilience efforts to focus on building back better to withstand future climatic and geophysical events, to create a more robust, climate-resilient infrastructure, encouraging better land use planning, to expedite private and public-private investment in priority sectors that address the structural economic vulnerabilities exposed by Hurricane Melissa, and to enable growth and diversification of Jamaica's economic base. Those are objectives, Mr. President, that any well-thinking Jamaican would support. But, Mr. President, support for the objectives does not relieve us of the duty to scrutinize the mechanism. This is a bill, Mr. President, that has been sold by the government fundamentally as legislation for the Jamaican people, and in particular, those whose lives, homes, livelihoods, communities, and sense of normalcy were most directly disrupted by Hurricane Melissa. And that's why, Mr. President, I find it unfortunate, among other things, that despite the bill being amended prior to being retabled in that other place, and further amended during committee in that other place, there remains no clear, defined, and enshrined statement of the objects of the legislation in the operative provisions of the bill. Right? Nothing placing Hurricane Melissa and the people most affected by Hurricane Melissa at the center of the legislation. Yes, Hurricane Melissa is mentioned in the long title and the memorandum of objects and reasons, but those are not the same thing as placing the objects of the act directly in the body of the legislation itself. This omission is important, Mr. President, for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that Parliament is creating a statutory framework for a specific purpose, particularly where the legislation establishes an authority with significant and unprecedented powers. There is particular value, in my view, of stating the objectives of the legislation in the act itself. Because if this bill is truly about reconstruction and resilience, then the law should say so expressly. Not only in its explanation, but in the operative provisions of the legislation. It should make clear that this extraordinary authority, with these extraordinary powers, exists for a defined and people-centric purpose to rebuild affected communities, to restore dignity and normalcy, and to strengthen Jamaica's resilience in a way that is inclusive, transparent, and accountable. This type of inclusion, Mr. President, is not unusual or unprecedented in our legislation. The Child Diversion Act, for example, contains an express provision setting out the objects of that act. The Data Protection Act also embeds its objects directly in the operative provisions under the heading Interpretation and Objects. So the point I'm making is not novel, nor is it consistent with our legislative practice. Mr. President, it appears to me from this action that this bill is being presented as being about the people affected by the hurricane, but proposed to be passed without those people who have sacrificed most, the victims, being sufficiently centered in the legal architecture of the bill, including a clear objects provision, Mr. President, goes to the heart of guiding how the authority will interpret its mandate, how Cabinet will design projects, how priorities will be set, and how this Parliament and the Jamaican people will judge whether the authority has succeeded. It's also important for another reason, Mr. President. The bill is being presented as time-bound. I've heard that repeatedly. The government has repeatedly said that NaRRA is not intended to be permanent. But if the authority is to exist for a finite purpose, then the act should clearly state and define that purpose. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to determine from the legislation alone whether the authority's objectives have been fulfilled or whether the authority has effectively concluded its work. Indeed, Mr. President, no one can argue that this bill is not well-intentioned. But, Mr. President, I contend that the role of the Senate is not to merely endorse intention. It's to ensure that the institutional framework we're being asked to approve is properly calibrated, is legally sound, and capable of delivering on the intended outcomes in a manner that is effective, sustainable, and consistent with our broader system of governance in this country. And on this side, Mr. President, it's well known that we have concerns regarding how the bill is currently drafted. And those concerns span all those areas of responsibility that I just described. It's important to acknowledge as well that these concerns are not just on the side of the chamber. They have been articulated broadly and repeatedly by civil society, by environmental advocates, by governance stakeholders, by professional voices, and Jamaicans who support reconstruction, but who are understandably concerned about the fact that urgency seems to be used to displace inclusion, consultation, and in some respects, accountability. This is a piece of legislation of considerable breadth and consequence. It establishes an authority with far-reaching powers, unprecedented powers, powers to influence how projects will be conceived, approved, accelerated, and executed at a national level. It's precisely the type of legislation, Mr. President, that would have benefited from a more expansive and inclusive consultative process, including, in my view, referral to a joint select committee. Mr. President, I appreciate that the government is motivated by urgency. I think we all are. But urgency in execution does not require the compression of consultation to the point where people who are most affected by this, the Jamaican people, and some stakeholders who may be well positioned to strengthen the bill, are not given a meaningful opportunity to shape its final form. Mr. President, I don't intend to relitigate every issue raised in the lower house and in civil society, but in my view, there are several central issues that remain unresolved that resonate with me. And I'm going to focus my contribution on a few of those areas where I believe the design of the bill remains misaligned with the outcomes it seeks to achieve, and where targeted amendments could strengthen rather than frustrate the objectives of national reconstruction and resilience. Mr. President, the first issue I wish to address is accountability and an element of the accountability architecture proposed under the bill, and particularly the reliance that's being placed on the Jamaica Reconstruction and Resilience Oversight Committee, JAMRA. And further, the comparison that has been made between JAMRA and the Economic Program Oversight Committee, EPOC. Let me say at the outset that I don't raise this point to diminish EPOC. The Prime Minister himself has described EPOC as a tremendous success. And by any fair assessment, I think that's correct. EPOC was, I think, one of the more effective public oversight mechanisms in Jamaica's history. Yes. Indeed, the concept was lauded by the IMF, and it was at a time when this mechanism was critical for building confidence, for communicating progress, and for supporting public discipline during a very difficult period of economic adjustment. It's important to recall as well, and to put on record, that this was conceptualized and implemented under the last PNP-led administration as part of a broader holistic reform program that sought to rescue an economy that was at the time teetering on the edge, to restore fiscal credibility, to restore confidence, and to place Jamaica on a more disciplined and sustainable economic path, which we're still on today. Right? So we're reaping the benefits of that decision. But Mr. President, if EPOC is being relied on as a precedent, then we must be precise about what EPOC was and what it did and the environment in which it operated. We can be selective about the comparison. EPOC didn't exercise any statutory power. It didn't approve any spends, any projects. It did not direct any agencies. It did not enter into any contracts. It didn't override or influence any regulatory approvals. What EPOC effectively did was monitor the country's performance against a macroeconomic program that was already constrained by very significant guardrails. Right? At the time, Jamaica was operating within the framework of an IMF program. There were agreed targets with the IMF. There was ongoing oversight by the IMF itself, quarterly targets to meet and quarterly oversight. There were defined fiscal and macroeconomic benchmarks to meet. And importantly, Jamaica also moved during that period to legislate fiscal rules which imposed a legal discipline around the management of public finances. Right? So it was entrenched in the law that we needed to be fiscally responsible. In that context, Mr. President, I contend that EPOC was not the source of discipline in the system. It monitored it, it commented on it, but the system was already disciplined by binding fiscal rules, agreed IMF targets, and continued IMF oversight. So the distinction between the operating environment that EPOC enjoyed and what we're looking at now for JAMRA is important. EPOC helped Jamaicans to understand whether the government was meeting agreed benchmarks. It helped to maintain confidence in the reform, and that was very important. But it was not responsible for executing the program, and it was not responsible for exercising the powers of the state. NaRRA is different. NaRRA is not being established to merely monitor government performance or activity. NaRRA is being established to act autonomously. It's being established to prepare, implement, and oversee reconstruction and resilience projects at a massive scale. It's being given the ability to procure goods, work, services. It's being given a role to coordinate approving entities. It's being given powers to issue directives. And through the step-in mechanism, the framework allows for decisions of existing approving authorities to be displaced under certain circumstances. That's a very different category of institution. So, Mr. President, in summary, EPOC monitored power, and NaRRA will be exercising power. And once we're dealing with an institution that exercises statutory power, particularly power of this breadth and consequence, I'll say it again, the accountability framework must be stronger than the external oversight committee that is being proposed to stand outside of the legislation that underpins the institution. And that brings me squarely to JAMRA. The government has placed significant emphasis on JAMRA as part of the accountability framework for NaRRA. And I personally don't doubt that an oversight committee comprised of credible Jamaicans can add tremendous value to the execution. As EPOC has shown, public reporting, independent commentary, and broader stakeholder engagement can really help to build confidence around a national effort. But there's a fundamental problem, Mr. President, in my view. JAMRAC is not established in the bill. It's not recognized in the bill. Its mandate is not defined at all in the bill. Its right to information is not set out in the bill. Its reporting obligations are not set out in the bill. The relationship with NaRRA, the minister, cabinet, parliament is nowhere to be found in the legislation. It becomes even more important when you read Section 14 of the bill, the confidentiality provision. The provision places a duty of secrecy and confidentiality on persons having an official duty under the Act or being employed in its administration. Disclosure is only protected where it is permitted or required under the Act or any other law. So the practical issue is this. If JAMRAC is not identified under the Act, what is the legal basis upon which NaRRA information is going to flow to JAMRAC? If JAMRAC is going to provide any meaningful oversight, what information will it receive? Who decides what it receives? Will it have access as a right, or will it only be discretionary? Will it be able to examine details, project-level information, procurement information, directive-related information, and material implementation issues? Or will it be limited to information curated for public consumption? These questions are important because the Jamaican people are being asked to trust an authority with extraordinary powers at an extraordinary moment. The trust cannot rest only on assurances. It must be supported by law, structure, access to information, and clear reporting. Mr. President, this is where the comparison between EPOC and NaRRA does not carry as far as the government would suggest. EPOC could function without legislative teeth because it was monitoring performance within a macroeconomic framework already supported by agreed targets, IMF oversight, and legislated fiscal rules. JAMRAC is being presented as a central plank of oversight for an authority that will exercise significant legal, operational, and financial powers. That requires a different architecture, in my view. Mr. President, we must distinguish between what is meant by oversight and governance. Oversight is just one component of governance. It happens after the fact. It reviews, it reports, it comments, it scrutinizes. But governance, on the other hand, shapes decisions as they are being made. It sets parameters, it tests assumptions, it manages conflict, it reviews risk, and it ensures discipline before decisions are taken. So, this bill contains a lot of after-the-fact mechanisms. There are reports, audits, parliamentary tabling. There's Auditor General who can access information, yes? Those things are important, but they do not fully substitute for governance within the institution at the point where decisions are being made. This is particularly important because NaRRA is not a small administrative office. Right? And we've heard that this model under which NaRRA is being created is replicated throughout our system. But there is no true comparable. It's going to interface with resources and stakeholders at a scale that we've never seen before. So this is precisely why we need to ensure that the accountability framework is embedded and the accountability framework is credible. Mr. President, I don't want anybody to leave with the impression that I'm saying that JAMRAC is undesirable. My point is that if JAMRAC is going to be relied on as a meaningful part of the accountability architecture, it should not be left outside of the four corners of the legislation. Mr. President, at a minimum, the bill should recognize JAMRAC. It should seek to define its mandate, specify its access to information, and remove any ambiguity that exists there. It needs to provide for reporting to Parliament, and it needs to clarify how it will interact with these confidentiality provisions. Alternatively, if the government is unwilling to place JAMRAC squarely in the Act, it needs to be strengthened to include more robust internal and parliamentary accountability mechanisms. As currently framed, Mr. President, we're being asked to accept a structure where significant statutory power is being placed in NaRRA, but the principal oversight mechanism being used to justify that concentration of power has no statutory footing. That's not a sufficient answer to the governance concerns that have been raised. JAMRAC may be useful as a public confidence mechanism, but unless it is legally enabled, and unless it has access to information, it cannot at all be a credible element of the oversight. The lesson, Mr. President, from EPA is not that oversight bodies never need the law. The lesson, Mr. President, is that oversight works when its surrounding framework is clear, disciplined, and credible. And I contend, Mr. President, that for NaRRA, the surrounding framework is still being created. Right? It needs some work. And if this bill is truly for the Jamaican people, particularly those whose lives and communities must now be rebuilt, then we must get the framework right in the legislation itself. Mr. President, the second issue I wish to address is the absence of a clear sunset clause and the risk that NaRRA becomes not merely an emergency mechanism, but a parallel system of governance. The government itself has made the case for NaRRA on the basis of urgency. The argument is that Hurricane Melissa has created an extraordinary national shock, which is true, and the ordinary machinery of government is too slow, too fragmented, and too cumbersome to deliver reconstruction at the pace required, and that a focused, empowered authority is therefore necessary. I understand that argument. Indeed, Mr. President, I accept that the normal machinery has not consistently delivered capital projects with the speed and discipline required. But after a decade in office, Mr. President, that reality can't be treated as an abstract institutional failure. Right? We speak about it as though it's something that we have no control over. Right? The government has had substantial time, Mr. President, to address weaknesses in execution, project preparation, procurement approvals, and delivery. If the government now asks the Parliament to approve an extraordinary mechanism because the existing system is too slow, I believe Parliament is entitled to insist that the mechanism remains tied to the emergency that justified it. NaRRA must therefore be treated like an emergency tool. It must be tied to the event that justified its creation. It must have a defined life cycle. It must have a clear endpoint. It must not become a permanent substitute for reforming the ordinary systems of government. As currently drafted, Mr. President, the bill does not provide that clarity. It provides for eventual dissolution, but it does not provide a fixed sunset date, a maximum operational period, or an objective statutory test that determines when the authority must come to an end. The day of dissolution is left to be appointed by the minister. That's not sufficient, Mr. President, for an authority with these powers. Now, the powers are extraordinary, and I mean, they can be defensible maybe in the context of an emergency. But these powers should not seek to be justified as an open-ended feature of our governance architecture. That would be a mistake. If we're not careful, what we're going to do is we're going to create one system for ordinary Jamaica and another system for accelerated Jamaica. One system with the usual approvals, safeguards, processes, and frictions, and another system that is empowered to bypass or compress them. That can be a long-term answer. This is particularly important because the government has linked NaRRA not only to the post-disaster reconstruction, but to a broader strategic investment through Fast Jamaica. The broader the mandate becomes, the stronger the case for a defined endpoint should be. Mr. President, my proposal is therefore straightforward. The government itself has repeatedly described the authority as time-bound. Then its time-bound nature should not only exist in speeches, it should be reflected clearly in the legislation itself. So in my view, the cleanest approach would be for the Act to provide for NaRRA to expire automatically after 5 years, unless extended with justification by affirmative resolution of both houses of parliament. 5 years is not an unreasonable period. It's long enough to allow the authority to mobilize, plan, procure, coordinate, and deliver a meaningful reconstruction program. And there's an off-ramp described in the legislation itself that will allow for projects that are in progress to move into the normal system of government in transitional arrangements. It would be a clear signal to the Jamaican people that these extraordinary powers are temporary and that they must be justified again if they are to continue beyond the period. Right? And there is an alternative approach. The life of the authority could be tied to the substantial achievement of the objectives for which it was created. But of course, for that to work, the bill would first need to include a clear provision setting out the objectives of the authority, which it does not have currently. Once those objects are clearly enshrined in the legislation, then the legislation could provide for the minister to certify that the core objectives of the act have been satisfied and subject to affirmative resolution of both houses of parliament that could trigger a dissolution. What should not happen, Mr. President, is that the authority continues indefinitely simply because the minister has not appointed a day of dissolution. A sunset clause is not a procedural nicety. It's a necessary safeguard, in my view. It's a mechanism to ensure discipline. And it's a signal that the parliament understands the difference between an emergency response and permanent governance. Mr. President, the third issue follows naturally from the second issue. By the government's own admission, the ordinary machinery of government is too slow, too fragmented, and too inefficient to deliver reconstruction at the pace that is now required. Even it has been said that it's too fragmented to deliver at the ordinary pace that the country requires. And this is a serious admission. And I contend, Mr. President, that the consequences of that admission needs to go beyond just the creation of NaRRA. If the normal system is too slow, we shouldn't simply create an extraordinary authority to operate around it. We should also require a program to fix it. Mr. President, this bill creates NaRRA and gives it extraordinary powers. But I contend, Mr. President, that it's deficient in that it doesn't require a parallel program to identify the bottlenecks, the reforms in process, the strengthening of institutional capacity that will leave Jamaica with a better framework once NaRRA has done its work. Mr. President, if the bill is genuinely about resilience, the resilience cannot only be physical. It cannot just be roads and bridges and schools. It must also be institutional. A resilient Jamaica must have institutions that can plan, approve, finance, procure, and implement public projects without requiring workarounds. So we need to fix the normal system. The bill should therefore, in my view, Mr. President, require a parallel reform program focused on improving the ordinary machinery of government. That program should be visible, Mr. President. The country should not be asked only to look at what NaRRA is building, but the country should also be able to see what Jamaica is learning. We should know whether approval timelines are being reduced in the ordinary system, whether procurement and project preparation is being improved, and whether the agencies that we've identified as being too slow are being strengthened. And I contend, Mr. President, that this parallel program would not at all delay reconstruction, but it would leave Jamaica in a much better place. Mr. President, the goal of this legislation should not be to build a bypass. The goal should be to repair the road as well, the ordinary road that all of us have to drive. And when this period ends, Mr. President, Jamaica shouldn't simply have been rebuilt. Jamaica should have had better institutions coming out of it. Mr. President, before I close, I want to briefly engage with some of the arguments advanced in support of this bill, particularly some of the arguments that have been made by Honorable Minister Maurice Dixon in her opening contribution. I don't intend to respond to each of them point by point, but there are a couple of them beyond what I've touched on already that I feel like I need to engage with. Firstly, Mr. President, is the framing of the bill as a response to bureaucracy and weak delivery. Mr. President, the minister presented the bill as being necessary to respond to the failures of the ordinary machinery of government to deliver. Right? And the example that she used was an ordinary delivery. It wasn't an express delivery. And said, listen, we're not set up to do things efficiently. And as I said before, I understand that argument. But, Mr. President, that kind of framing risks presenting the choice too narrowly, as though we need to choose between bureaucracy and delivery. Mr. President, Jamaica does not need bureaucracy for its own sake. But what we do need is structured discipline and accountability. And there's a difference between unnecessary delay and necessary governance. The challenge that is before us, Mr. President, is to remove what is unnecessary while preserving what is essential. The second point, Mr. President, is the defense of the CEO-led model as a mechanism for clear accountability. The minister said that not every public entity requires a board, and that the executive agency model reflects a philosophy of clear CEO accountability to the responsible minister. And I accept the clarity that, having direct responsibility is important, and diffused responsibility can produce delay and weak execution. But clear accountability does not require the removal of governance. Mr. President, in the private sector, the suggestion that a CEO becomes more effective by removing the board, removing risk oversight as a requirement, leaving reporting to discretion, that suggestion would be laughable. And I'm sure, Mr. President, that Senator Duncan would not disagree with me, even if it's at pains to agree with me. A CEO is not made effective by weakening the systems around the office, Mr. President. A CEO is made effective when their authority is clear. And they're made even more effective by a surrounding governance framework that's strong. And the same principle applies here, Mr. President. Again, NaRRA is not an ordinary arm of government. It's going to be at the center of a lot of activity. And it requires more responsibility, Mr. President, than personal accountability. It requires an institutional architecture. Mr. President, the third issue follows naturally from the second issue, which is the suggestion that the bill contains a sufficient multi-layered oversight framework. And I mentioned before the difference between oversight and governance, right? And the minister emphasized that the oversight for NaRRA is multifaceted. Cabinet, the minister, audits, auditor general, and these mechanisms are very important. But the existence of multiple points by itself, it doesn't answer the design concern. Cabinet approval is not the same thing as institutional governance. Audit is not the same thing as real-time decision-making discipline. Parliamentary scrutiny is after the fact. It's not the same as structured accountability at the point where decisions are being taken. So the real issue is one of adequacy. It's whether the framework is strong enough to cover off the kind of power that NaRRA will exercise, and whether it can sustain public confidence as decisions are made quickly, at scale, with significant consequences for the Jamaican people. Mr. President, several examples were made and comparisons were drawn with other jurisdictions: Dominica, New Zealand, Japan, Peru, others. So the concept is not novel, and the comparisons are useful. But we must take the full lessons from them, Mr. President. The lesson is not only that these countries created these special reconstruction bodies after the disaster, but the fuller lesson is that where they created these powerful special purpose reconstruction bodies. They also address governance, reporting, statutory purpose, public confidence, and institutional transition. They did that all at once. Dominica's framework, for example, included a more layered institutional structure with policy direction at the top, supervisory mechanisms, audit and risk oversight, and execution capacity operating within a defined framework. The New South Wales model also provides a useful example where it's CEO-centric, but there is an advisory board and a structured interagency coordination. These models recognize that speed and structure can reinforce each other, Mr. President. And Jamaica should not borrow just the idea of creating this very powerful entity without taking the governance along with it. Mr. President, in closing, I return to where I began. The stated objectives of the bill are worthy objectives. The people who suffered most from Hurricane Melissa deserve urgency. They deserve competent execution. They deserve homes restored, communities rebuilt, roads repaired, schools repaired, health facilities strengthened, livelihoods protected, and normalcy returned. But they also deserve a reconstruction framework that they can trust. This bill is not simply about creating an authority. It's about how the state exercises extraordinary and unprecedented power in an extraordinary moment. And when Parliament is being asked to confer that extraordinary power, I think we need to insist on extraordinary accountability. The amendments that have been proposed suggested, both in the other place and externally, and that will be suggested today, in my view, are practical. They're targeted and they're consistent with the government's own stated objectives. If this bill is truly about the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa and the people most affected by it, then let's place it in the bill. If JAMROC is to provide meaningful oversight, then let us give it some legal footing and ensure that it has access to information and reporting obligations. If NaRRA is intended to be time-bound, then let us make it time-bound in the Act. If the ordinary machinery of government is too slow and fragmented, then let's require a visible program to fix it. None of these things will delay reconstruction. Because there's an argument that if you are constructive about the bill, then you are opposite to reconstruction efforts. And I want to dispel that argument. Right? None of this prevents the government from acting with speed. None of this weakens the response and the ability to respond to the emergency. They simply ensure that the speed is accompanied by structure. The flexibility is accompanied by accountability. And that the extraordinary powers remain tied to extraordinary circumstances that are being used to justify them. I can't see why there is a reasonable opposition to that. Mr. President, the Jamaican people are not only asking, or they are not asking for promises. They're asking for delivery that they can see. They're asking, Mr. President, for systems that they can trust, for safeguards that continue to protect the public interest. One of the most important tests of this legislation will not only be what NaRRA will build, but will be whether Jamaicans believe that what is built was delivered in a transparent, fair, efficient way, and that whatever was built and delivered was in their interest. Because this reconstruction thing is not only going to be a physical exercise, it's going to be an exercise of public trust. You see, the biggest exam probably that we have taken as a country. And the trust is not built by asking people to accept assurances that things that are being set up outside of the bill will happen. It starts with how we construct the law, the structure, the reporting, the transparency, the accountability. Mr. President, Jamaica must rebuild. Nobody on this side is opposed to that. But we must rebuild with competence. We must rebuild with transparency. We must rebuild with accountability. And if we are serious about resilience, then resilience must mean more than the physical infrastructure. It must mean stronger institutions, stronger safeguards, and stronger democracy. And if we're truly legislating for the people that we're supposed to serve, then the people must be able to see themselves in the legislation. They must see the purpose. They must see the safeguards. They must see how decisions will be made. They must see how the money will be spent. And they must know that when this extraordinary mechanism is put in place, that it actually will come to an end. That we're not going to roll this thing over into perpetuity. And that is not obstruction or opposition. I think it's responsible lawmaking. Mr. President, we owe the victims of Hurricane Melissa more than urgency. We owe them urgency with accountability. We owe them speed with transparency. And we need to rebuild with trust. That's the standard that the Jamaican people deserve. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Small Ferguson. Thank you very much. Senator Duncan, put on the other mic for me, please. This one over this side. Good. Thank you very much, Senator Duncan. Proceed, please.
Okay. Afternoon, colleagues. Mr. President, I rise in support of the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority bill. And I do so because I say, without any doubt in my mind, that it is in the best interest of Jamaica. I have given freely of my time in leadership of private sector bodies, oversight bodies, socio-economic programs, various task forces, example, the COVID Economic Recovery Task Force, government boards, and I'm now a government senator. I stand here as a patriotic Jamaican who wants to see Jamaica deliver on its promise. This is a game-changing moment for Jamaica, where we as a country can convert disaster and a crisis into a tremendous opportunity to fast-track Jamaica's development. Let me begin, Mr. President, by acknowledging the contributions of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, that the concerns have been raised about the concentration of authority in a single body, about the adequacy of accountability mechanisms are not frivolous. They are the right questions to ask. My purpose today is not to dismiss those concerns, but to address them, as I believe the bill is fit for purpose with appropriate safeguards. But it also demonstrates how this can how this bill can facilitate and fast track Jamaica's development. Let's first start with the scale of the matter that we're dealing with. Mr. President, Hurricane Melissa inflicted $12.2 billion in damage, in assessed damage and economic loss on this country, US $12.2 billion. This figure represents 56.7% of Jamaica's entire 2024 GDP. More than 215,000 structures were damaged or destroyed. Black River and Falmouth, two of our more historic towns, face not repair but comprehensive reconstructions. Roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, and community infrastructure across Western parishes sustained damage at a scale that this country has never experienced in modern history. $12.2 billion US dollars in damage in a country where our economy last year generated $21 billion US dollars of output. We're not talking about a bad hurricane season that requires some patching work and some insurance claims and a supplementary budget. We're talking about a catastrophic event that has damaged or destroyed the physical fabric of a significant portion of this nation. This government was able to source a very significant multilateral financing package of US $6.7 billion, built on the credibility of performance and discipline by the government. But as significant and as historic as it is, the package only covers 55% of the overall damage of economic loss. It leaves a financing gap of US $5.5 billion. $5.5 billion. This gap cannot be closed by public borrowing. Our fiscal responsibility framework, our fiscal rules would not allow it. And prudent debt management certainly would not permit it. Therefore, private capital, both domestic and international, must be mobilized alongside public investment to close this gap. Right? But will this private capital come? Let me address this question, because it is directly relevant to whether Fast Jamaica, the private investment pillar of NaRRA, will actually work, and is Jamaica a good prospect for investments? Mr. President, I firmly believe that Jamaica has a solid value proposition at this time. Our macroeconomic position entering the reconstruction period is the strongest that it has ever been in living memory. Our debt to GDP ratio was reduced from approximately 147% to approximately 62% in 13 years. A fact that speaks to the institutional anchoring of fiscal discipline in this country. Unemployment at a historic low of 3.3% before Melissa. Our net international reserves were at $6.9 billion as at the end of March, the highest ever recorded. Following Hurricane Melissa, all three major credit rating agencies reaffirmed Jamaica's sovereign rating. Moody's went further and issued an upgrade, citing the strength of our institutional framework and our record of discipline. Mr. President, Jamaica has a window of opportunity with a geopolitical environment, albeit very volatile. The global rules-based trade order has been fractured, supply chains are being reorganized, not primarily around cost, but around political trust. And this government has employed a foreign policy modality which has made us friends to all. Jamaica is the third largest English-speaking nation in the Americas with a deep US-Jamaica bilateral relationship with close proximity to the US East and Gulf Coast ports. Mr. President, Jamaica is positioned for further investment to become the logistics hub of the Americas. Jamaica is primed for investment. Global capital is looking for a home, Mr. President. Our job is to build the legal architecture that says Jamaica is ready, the pathway is clear, and our project will be executed at speed and without having to navigate a bureaucratic maze. That is what NaRRA and Fast Jamaica achieves, and let me explain precisely how. Mr. President, Fast Jamaica is a private investment pillar of the bill that is designed to capture capital, and I believe it needs to be highlighted very much in this national dialogue. Fast Jamaica, the facilitated acceleration of strategic transformation, the framework creates a legally enabled expeditious pathway for private investment projects above a threshold of US 15 million across 12 designated priority sectors. These sectors span energy infrastructure, digital infrastructure, telecommunications, logistics, ports and aviation, water and sewage, low-income housing and urban development, high-value tourism, entertainment, creative industries, specialized healthcare, high-value agro-processing, advanced manufacturing, STEM education, and research, and critical minerals and rare earths. And the cabinet retains the power to designate additional sectors. And we're very proud of that. Now, Mr. President, I want to draw that Senate's attention to something that has been mentioned in passing. And that deserves some emphasis. The Fast Jamaica entry threshold was deliberately reduced from 150 million to US 15 million. The policy decision of setting the threshold at US 15 million is of significant importance to Fast Jamaica, as it can really open up opportunities for Jamaican private sector companies, for diaspora investors, for regional capital, consortiums of small firms pooling resources to invest in projects. Mr. President, there are projects sitting on the files of JAMPRO, the DBJ, and on the desks of private sector executives across this country, projects that have been held up, but not by a lack of capital or a lack of will, but by the bureaucratic maze that this bill is designed to dismantle. The process for accessing Fast Jamaica is transparent and sequential. An investor submits the project for assessment. The government assesses for strategic merit, economic impact, national interest, and recommends to Cabinet whether to proceed and on what terms. Cabinet then designates as a strategic investment project triggering the Fast Jamaica pathway. NaRRA then uses its powers under the bill to coordinate approvals across all relevant agencies. Mr. President, my hope is that with NaRRA, the era of proposals sitting on desk for years is finally over, and private capital will come to the table and utilize the Fast bill and close this funding gap of US 5.5 billion. And of course, as we go through this project as a country and as a government that learns and adapts, we would expect that over this period, that all of the challenges that we have seen in the procurement process, in all of these approval processes, in the bureaucracy, that they will be addressed. And I know for sure that the procurement policy is being looked at as we speak. And therefore, at the end of the day and at the end of this period, when we see what works best, we expect that we will adapt best practices going forward. I want to address the centralization question. Mr. President, the concern I've heard most frequently in the debate is that NaRRA represents an inappropriate centralization of our authority. That it consolidates too much power in a single body, that it displaces existing agencies and establishes processes in ways that are constitutionally or institutionally problematic. I want to address this directly. And I think it rests on a misunderstanding of what centralization means in the context of disaster reconstruction. And I also think it conflates two very different things: the centralization of coordination and the centralization of power. NaRRA is not a superseded authority. It does not absorb the functions of line ministries, existing statutory bodies, or local government. NaRRA is not a superseded authority. It does not absorb the functions of line ministries, existing statutory bodies, or local government. What it does and what it must do is serve as a single point of national coordination across all those entities. It eliminates fragmentation, it eliminates interagency delay, it eliminates a situation familiar to every Jamaican who has ever watched a government project move from conception to groundbreaking, where a proposal that has cabinet approval still sits on seven different desks, awaiting 7 different sign-offs from 7 different agencies, operating on 7 different timelines with 7 different institutional priorities. I have been in the private sector all my professional life, and I can tell you without qualification that many serious investment proposals do not get executed in Jamaica due to the bureaucratic nightmare. This is the problem that this bill solves. The Fast Jamaica Pathway is a legislative commitment that an investor will receive a clear approval or rejection, not silence, not being passed around from one agency to the next, and not an invitation to come back 6 months when the relevant committee is going to meet. Mr. President, I ask those who argue for less centralization, when did decentralized, fragmented, multi-agency approaches to national programs deliver results at a scale and in a timely manner? Right. We do not have the luxury of repeating that story with a US $12.2 billion economic damage that we as a country have. Large reconstruction efforts require coordination, decentralized structures, and that large reconstruction efforts require coordination that decentralized structures are institutionally incapable of providing. And let me talk about JAMROC now. The accountability architecture. Mr. President, I want to talk about JAMROC, Jamaica Reconstruction and Resilience Oversight Committee, which the Prime Minister has announced and will provide independent oversight of NaRRA's work. But I want to confess I'm in a position of somewhat a conflict of interest in this discussion because JAMROC is modeled on EPOC, the Economic Program Oversight Committee. EPOC was a social consensus body that I advocated for and worked closely with Dr. Peter Phillips, and I will tell you how this happened, Ramon, because you need to know the facts, my brethren. Okay? We and Ramon and Senator Ferguson, Small Ferguson and I, Senator Small Ferguson and I work very closely together, right now. But he was their own because he was their own at the time. And I myself and another CEO of another financial sector company sat down with Dr. Peter Phillips, and I said to Dr. Phillips, we are not signing that debt exchange agreement unless we get an oversight body. That is how EPOC came about. Okay? And I worked closely with Dr. Peter Phillips. We agreed on who would sit on this, who would sit on this body. Dr. Peter Phillips, we agreed on the unions, we agreed on agriculture, we agreed on small business, we agreed on the financial sector, we agreed on that's agriculture and small business, the unions. We agreed that would be the representation on EPOC, Dr. Peter Phillips and I. I went to my office and I wrote the terms of reference with Mike Hilton and Mark Harrison, and EPOC was signed off the following morning. Okay? We're gonna get to it. Right? So EPOC was not conceptualized by the PNP. The financial sector came to the table. You did. with the caveat, let me tell you why EPOC worked, and many people know why EPOC worked, but I will quote somebody. I'm going to quote Jeanette Calder, Executive Director at the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. Hi, Jeanette. Okay. There is no more powerful tool for oversight than social consensus. And EPOC carried us through the economic reform program. It played a role in keeping the opposition then on side, keeping us informed, working with the Minister of Finance. End of quote. EPOC was created in 2013 to provide independent oversight to the program, IMF Extended Fund Facility, but it continued outside of IMF programs, because in 2019 we seized the IMF program. In 2020, after COVID, 2021 or so, we went back to the IMF in then. So it oversaw Jamaica's economic reform program with or without an IMF agreement, right? And EPOC was wowed down as the central bank got independence, and the Independent Fiscal Commission was established. Then the institutional framework was in place, right? EPOC was not written into law. EPOC was not embedded in any IMF agreement. A simple MOU with the Minister of Finance. It had no enforcement powers. It could not compel the government to do anything. It only could report and publish, hold press conferences, and lay its findings before the public, who for good reason believed EPOC to be independent, credible, and not influenced by the political class. Mr. President, it turned out that these limited powers exercised with rigor and with a genuine commitment were more effective at driving government accountability than many mechanisms with far more formal authority. EPOC held two political administrations to account. It reported when targets were met and when they were missed. It published assessments in plain language for journalists and citizens and international investors who could read and understand it. It demonstrated that a civil society-led, non-partisan, public reported body could maintain its integrity through changes of government, through political pressures, through economic turbulence, and through the occasional, very uncomfortable conversations that we would have had with either side of the aisle. When the news is not good, the government vexed with you. When the news is better, the opposition vexed with you. When the government outperforms, the opposition is vexed with you because you highlight our performance, right? Jamrock replicates the model in the Reconstruction context. Jamrock is a functional replication of EPOC, which many view as highly successful and with an effective public accountability mechanism. As the IMF and the World Bank relied heavily on IDB, relied heavily on those reports from EPOC and those consultations with EPOC, so will the IMF and World Bank, IDB, and the other agencies who are funding the $6.7 billion of recovery rely on Jamrock for the independent oversight that it will provide. Okay. Jamrock will be chaired by Professor Peter Blair Hedry of Stanford University, a Jamaican economist of international standing, with the independence, the credibility, and the platform to report without fear or favor. Jamrock will also include an opposition nominated member. So, as with EPOC, Jamrock is not written to legislation and is not in the NaRRA Act, but Jamrock can be just and effective as social consensus oversight body. Once it maintains its independence, it will be robust and an effective accountability mechanism. I am endorsing JAMRA and encouraging all well-thinking Jamaicans to do so. Transparency is not a concern. Transparency is not a concern. There's more than sufficient reporting into the minister, into the cabinet, into parliament, and more importantly, to the public through JAMRA. And of course, the prime minister and cabinet and all of those responsible. But JAMRA, as an independent body, will be reporting to the Jamaican public. In addition, NaRRA is required under the bill to lay before Parliament its annual report and audited financial statements. NaRRA will have at all times an electronic list of all reconstruction and resilience projects publicly. Transparency. Additionally, NaRRA will be subject to independent external audit, integrity commission, and the Auditor General shall be entitled at all times to examine the accounts and other records in relation to the authority. That's in the bill, right? The PAC and the PAAC retains their full oversight roles. Cabinet retains full authority over all major projects and agreements, as it should under our democratic and constitutional arrangement. The CEO, there's about, who does the CEO report into? The CEO reports into the minister, who reports into the cabinet, and the chairman of the cabinet is the Honorable Dr. Andrew Michael Holness, is the chairman of the cabinet. You could not be reporting to a higher body than the cabinet. That's enshrined in our constitution. So let's go to the opportunity that we have as a country. Right? The private sector must prepare for the significant opportunities which will transpire and a tremendous scale of infrastructure development and investment that will take place across Jamaica. The financing is in place, US $6.7 billion from the IDB, World Bank, CAF, and CDB. That multilateral anchor does not simply represent money, it represents risk mitigation. When the World Bank co-finances a project and the IDB is in the capital structure alongside a private investor, the risk profile of that investment materially improves. On that note, I want to make a particular point about domestic long-term capital, because it's perhaps the most important and least discussed dimension of the financing strategy. And Ramon, we work together on this. Jamaica's pension funds or insurance companies, these institutions manage billions of dollars in assets and have historically been constrained in their ability to deploy capital into long-term Jamaica infrastructure projects because the pipeline of bankable projects has been thin and the legal framework to do so has been uncertain. Fast Jamaica will change that. A project with cabinet designation, NaRRA coordination, and a multilateral co-financing is a materially different credit proposition than an unsupported project seeking development approval through the standard process. It is more bankable, it is predictable, it has more attractive long-term institutional. It will attract more long-term institutional capital. Our pension funds and insurance companies should be examining this investment pipeline right now. Every economy that has successfully used a reconstruction imperative to leapfrog its prior development trajectory has done so by a deliberate, explicit choice not to restore what existed before, but to build something better. The choice we have made as a government is to use this reconstruction moment strategically. Prime Minister Holness has stated clearly, and I believe correctly, that we're not restoring a pre-Melissa Jamaica. We're building a post-Melissa Jamaica with climate resilient infrastructure, renewable energy systems, world-class trade, logistics infrastructure, and the digital economy backbone. Roads and bridges not built not to pre-minister standards, but to withstand Category 5. Urban centers planned for economic clusters planned. A new Kingston Public Hospital. The Port of Kingston Logistics Platform. Development and commercial opportunities. And I say this to the private sector, get on board. Development and commercial opportunities will certainly arise for the private sector during and the post-reconstruction period. The financial sector must step up to the plate to intermediate package and structure solutions for their institutional, corporate, small and medium enterprises who are able to grasp, research, and plan and capitalize on these opportunities that are going to hit Jamaica and significant capital flows that will hit Jamaica. Do not get caught up in the noise. Do not wait on the sidelines. Plan, prepare, and execute. Mr. President, I urge us all to view the destruction caused by Minister not just as a catastrophe, but which it undoubtedly was, but also a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The pipeline of projects would take us decades to execute without NaRRA. We now have the opportunity to deliver them at pace and scale because the social consensus, welcome to Jamrock, and the national focus that disaster has created, painful as its origins are, will provide a window for action that normal political and institutional conditions rarely permit. NaRRA and Fast Jamaica are the instruments through which we convert advantage into executed investment. Jobs, infrastructure, inclusive growth, business opportunities, increasing wealth, increasing purchasing power for our Jamaican people. So in conclusion, Mr. President, the concern raised in the debate and the public domain are concerns for a functioning parliament and a vibrant democracy, and they are to be respected. The answers to those concerns are in the bill and the accountability framework. The accountability architecture is rigorous. The governance framework is multi-layered. The private investment pathway is thoughtfully designed to be inclusive and fit for purpose. This bill is built for purpose. This bill is purpose-built for the task, a time-bound national delivery mandate. So with the same national spirit that we embraced the fiscal policy framework and the fiscal rules, when this debate is over and this bill is passed, let's work constructively. One Jamaica. Let's work constructively and continue our efforts to build a better Jamaica, which we all aspire to. Mr. President, I commend the bill to the Senate. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Tim.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, according to the government, NaRRA will bear responsibility for two distinct yet mutually reinforcing sets of projects, incorporating both public and private investment, approved reconstruction and resilience projects, including major infrastructural development at Burnham Field and the expansion of the Port of Kingston, and designated private sector-led NaRRA coordinated and expedited strategic investment projects. Based on the content of the bill, we are not sure that these have anything to do with Hurricane Melissa. We are told NaRRA isn't just about hurricane damage, but how will it impact the damage? Mr. President, the people want to know. The bill says nothing of the state of communities affected by Melissa. It has no statement of purpose or object to improve the people who were directly affected by the storm. Mr. President, billions, nay, trillions in Jamaican dollars are expected to flow down the Black River, flooding the Pedro Plains and making the hills of St. Andrew joyful together. We are expected to believe the nation will be transformed into a paradise of plenty at warp speed on the fast, the expedited pathway through Jamaica's regulatory approval process. We were told, Mr. President, that the problem all along was never that, quote, Jamaica lacked for investor interest, but that our processes were too slow to be attractive to investors. In other words, Mr. President, the government blames the inefficient bureaucracy for being a hindrance and for stymieing progress. But now, with FAST in play, diaspora investors, regional partners, and mid-scale international capital will be rushing to save the day. In introducing the NaRRA bill in the Senate, Senator Dana Morris Dixon referred to the announced Melissa-inspired multilateral funding financing package of $6.7 billion as a, quote, extraordinary achievement, a testament to the fiscal credibility of that Jamaica has built over a decade. It should be recalled first and foremost, Mr. President, that the sums include the good people of Jamaica's own money. 37 million from the nation's contingency fund and the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund, $91 million from the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, and $150 million from the insurance proceeds of the catastrophe bond. 58% of the total represents loans. US 3.9 billion, US 1 billion for each from the CAF, the IDB, and the World Bank, US 415 million from the IMF, US 200 million from the CDB, US 300 million an 8-year-old agreed IDB loan, a contingent credit facility negotiated and signed by the Prime Minister in Washington, D.C. in November 2018. The point, Mr. President, the use of our own money and loans being taken on our behalf is not as extraordinary as the minister suggests. And the spend of these sums requires, most critically, public oversight. Mr. President, why is the government celebrating additional debt as an achievement? Why has the minister and our colleague, Senator Morris Dixon, told us that we are getting a lot of money from the donor agencies, calling it contributions? Is she misleading us, Mr. President? I do not believe that is her intention. Mr. President, I must ask, how much of the package will actually be received by Jamaica? The December IMF announcement regarding the US $6.7 billion package was very clear in its language that Jamaica could get, quote, up to the named sums. Nothing was guaranteed. The 3 US $1 billion loans are yet to be approved, and it should be noted that the actual amount received by the Treasury from CRIF and the CAT bond was lower than indicated, as deductions were made for bank charges and administrative fees, as the Financial Secretary told the PAAC. Senator Duncan tells us the funding is in place. In the case of CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, has Jamaica yet upgraded from its C-class status in order to be eligible for the named sum? Senator Hill has left the room, but he told this House it would. What came of that CAF meeting in Panama in January? Has the Caribbean Development Bank loan been approved? Mr. President, has an application even been submitted? Mr. President, we know that in January 2026, the IMF approved the disbursements of $415 million to help meet Jamaica's urgent balance of payments needs and comes with strict conditionalities. It is not a reconstruction loan. What are the prospects for reconstruction as we stand? Mr. President, 2.4 billion of the US 6.7 billion, or 36% of the total promised, are in the form of private investment, which the IDB and the World Bank said they were, quote, working to attract and mobilize to support Jamaica's recovery and reconstruction. Are they still working, Mr. President? And how will worsening conditions, economic conditions from the Israeli-US war on Iran impact our prospects? Minister Vaz says the scenario is frightening. The World Bank recently noted that an unforeseen tightening of financial conditions globally could curb credit growth and business investment. Is the government being forthcoming with the Jamaican people on the state of the 6.7 billion, Mr. President? Mr. President, a mere 12 million, I repeat, 12 million or 0.18% of the US 6.7 billion, less than a fifth of 1% is in the form of grants, or to use the minister's expression, quote unquote, contributions. Mr. President, the NaRRA bill is being debated today to address a 12.2 billion reconstruction budget, a figure matching the PIOJ estimates of hurricane damage. If, Mr. President, the aim is to build back better, wouldn't we need a larger sum? That said, we are told that a shortfall of 5.5 billion in funding to match the budget will be made up with local, international, and diaspora investment. At a time of global uncertainty, war, and stagflation, the Wholeness, Reconstruction, and Resilience Plan appears to be based on the assumption that local and foreign investment will be available at several times the level at which it had ever previously been available, and further still, that this investment will bring it jobs, skills, and technology transfer. Is this reasonable, Mr. President? Is the government offering merely a promise, another 5 in 4, a 6 for a 9? Wow. We will know in 10 years whether this is another 5 in 4. Mr. President, our diaspora has been consistent in its support of Jamaicans. Remittances, as we know, are the most important injection of foreign exchange into the land. They act as direct cash transfers to our people. But, Mr. President, one wonders, why has our diaspora been holding out on us in playing an investment role? And why, too, have our local investors held out up to now? And as for foreign capital, in an economy already substantially owned by foreign interests, what new interests do they have? What more is there to sell, Mr. President? Did displacement caused by Melissa open opportunity to investors? How will NaRRA's powers to declare resilience projects impact the people whose land tenure lacks evidence of ownership, Mr. President? Mr. President, the Jamaica Beach Birthright and Environmental Movement submissions to the Parliament tell us that the bill in its current form threatens the Prescriptive Act of 1882, which provides minimal protection for public access to beaches and the tenure of those, such as fisherfolk, who have customarily occupied coastal lands informally. Maroon communities, too, have noted concerns about their lands. Section 25 of the bill names tourism as one of the areas that may be cabinet designated for strategic investment projects. We know, Mr. President, that Jamaica's tourism model depends on development along the coastline. We also know that coastal forests, including mangroves, have been destroyed in building hotels and other property along the coast. We know that the removal of grass beds to allow for the building of overwater bungalows is a driver of sand erosion and thus destruction of beaches. We know that we face the risk of rising sea levels. How will NaRRA protect us against these threats? Neither should environmental harm nor harm to communities be promoted by this bill. We heard the plans to develop Black River, Portland, and Trelawney for tourism. Will these plans double down on the model of tourism currently being expanded based on the capture of the coastline and foreclosing of people's access to the beach? Mr. President, I intend to propose amendments to ensure environmental and community protections under sections 19 and 25. Mr. President, we cannot risk environmental degradation and undermining of the resilience the government claims to be pursuing as a consequence of this bill. Mr. President, you may have noted, for instance, the Gleaner's article, Flow Backs NaRRA Push to Cut Telecoms Delays. In it, the VP and General Manager of Flow Jamaica is quoted as saying, quote, think about what we have to do to get one site up in my country. It takes an average of probably 14 months because I have to go through NEPA, Ministry of Health, municipality, and all these in order to get a site up. This is a cautionary tale, Mr. President. I, for one, am grateful that such provisions exist to protect Jamaicans from the health risks of cell sites.